The reason why nobody wants Joe Biden near them is because Joe Biden is a very bad president who also happens to be failing mentally. I mean, when we're talking about people who are having difficulties, Joe Biden literally yesterday stole valor on behalf of Beau Biden. He literally said that Beau Biden died in Iraq. That is not remotely true. That is not remotely true. I mean, you want to talk about things that we can fact check here? Beau Biden was deployed to Iraq in 2009, and he died of brain cancer in 2015. So I may not be a medical expert, but that 6-year gap between being in Iraq and dying in the United States in 2015 means you didn't die in Iraq, because it turns out the United States is not in Iraq as an actual country. Now, Biden has again tried to steal valor on behalf of Beau Biden's death before. Again, Beau Biden did serve in the military. That's wonderful. That's great. But it is stolen valor when you claim that you were killed in battle when you were not killed in battle. In 2019, Joe Biden tried to suggest that Beau Biden had died because of burn pits during his deployment. He said, quote, "In my view, I can't prove it yet. He came back with stage 4 glioblastoma. 18 months he lived knowing he was going to die." So according to medical expert Joe Biden, he knows that Beau Biden was killed in Iraq, and now he's saying it. So here is Joe Biden saying just that.
Just imagine, I mean it sincerely. I say this as a father of a man who won the Bronze Star, the Conspicuous Service Medal, and lost his life in Iraq.
Well, the good news is that the fact checkers will not be fact checking that. They will be talking about how Joe Biden tends to shade the facts and shave down the rough edges and all the rest. They'll never just say that he is what he is, which is a liar. And Joe Biden is, in fact, a frequent liar, which presumably is why Democrats in the Senate are trying to stay as far away from him as humanly possible, which, of course, means that Democrats have to have another line as to why they should be reelected in the Senate. And the line that they've settled on is, our democracy is at stake. Our democracy. Now, I like voting as much as the next guy. Democracy is a really important thing. Democracy is the worst system except for all of the others. However, I do not have faith that people who keep shouting about our democracy actually care about the institutions of our republic. I mean, I'm not sure what they really mean by democracy. By democracy, they mean like pure majority mob rule Athenian style. Like, what exactly are they looking at here? Or do they mean a sort of Republican system in which representatives get to decide how to vote after being elected to higher office and are checked and balanced in order to preserve rights that exist within the roles and duties that we all have to play as citizens? Like, well, what exactly do they mean by our democracy? It turns out that what the left means by our democracy is you disagree with me, so you're a threat to democracy, right? Which is really a riff on sort of the Theodore Adorno, Frankfurt School, Erich Fromm notion that if you are not a communist, it's because you're a fascist. That anybody who opposes the left is actually an authoritarian who opposes democracy itself. Mehdi Hassan, who used to be a worker for Al Jazeera, which is paid for by the Qatari government, not known for its democracy. Mehdi Hassan says that the midterm elections will either end democracy itself or provoke insurrection, which is a hell of a threat. Basically, if the Democrats win, then there will be an insurrection. And if the Democrats lose, then that can only be because democracy ended. So I'm having a hard time here spotting the distinction between what Mehdi Hassan here is saying and being anti-democracy, actually. Here he is.
But the problem I have is when I talk to members of Congress and senators on the show, they say, yes, it's really bad. Democracy is under threat. And also prescription drug prices. And also this and also that. And it's like, it's not one of many issues. It is the issue. It's existential. And I wish more of them would say that. Charlie, if the election deniers on the right win in 2022, in November, next month, to me, democracy looks like it's over in America. Fascism is here to stay. And if they lose, we get maybe another insurrection, domestic terrorism, a civil war, God forbid. I mean, is there any scope for optimism here?
I mean, I'm sorry, that's an amazing statement. It looks to me like if the Republicans win, the fascists have won and democracy is over, which presumably would necessitate an insurrection, would it not? Right? If fascists actually took over the United States, that would justify violence. And if they lose, then they will be the insurrectionists. I'm failing to make the distinction between the election deniers on the right and Mehdi Hassan right there in that particular clip. Right? Because again, when he says the fascists will take over and there will never be another sane and fair election, what exactly does that necessitate? Meanwhile, I got Eric Holder, who is complicit in the reduction of the deep state to just a tool of the administration. This is a guy who, as Attorney General, literally called himself the president's wingman, who was held in contempt of Congress for refusing to come forward and testify about Fast and Furious, a gun-running scandal in which his DOJ was complicit. He says, we'll lose our democracy if the Republicans win the House. Well, I mean, I guess prepare yourself because the Republicans are very likely to win the House.
The danger really is that parts of the Republican Party have become comfortable with the notion that in terms of popular support, they will be a minority party that has majority power. And we need to learn that from from history, not only American history, but from European history as well, some of our closest allies. Fascism rose in the 20th century in a lot of those countries, in Europe, not because fascism was strong, but because the defense of democracy was weak. And unless we in America defend our democracy and push back against those illiberal forces, we could be in a place where we could lose our democracy.
Again, the idea that everyone I dislike is a danger to democracy, but I, as Attorney General who targeted the political opponents of my boss, that I am a defender of democracy is rather galling to anybody who's watched politics more than 35 seconds. Well, meanwhile, the situation in Ukraine continues to devolve. It is not particularly shocking that Russia is ramping up the brutality. Again, this is what they do. Joe Biden mentioned yesterday that Russia's actions are brutal and beyond the pale, which of course they are.
What's your reaction to recent Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine?
Same as always, man. It's brutal. It's beyond the pale.
I mean, that is clearly true. The question is, what exactly is the exit plan? I keep asking for this, and nobody at the White House is forthcoming. Again, as I read yesterday on the program, the White House actually has been very clear that they have no idea how this thing is going to end. They only know that it's not going to end with Russia just running away and screaming and letting this thing go. So we'll just keep funding a war that I guess we've already quasi won and which has already reached its quasi endpoint. And this is from the Washington Post yesterday. Quote, privately, U.S. officials say neither Russia nor Ukraine is capable of winning the war outright, but they've ruled out the idea of pushing or even nudging Ukraine to the negotiating table. They say they do not know what the end of the war looks like or how it might end or when, insisting it's up to Kyiv. It's a wild statement. So you know that Ukraine isn't going to just win the war. And you also know kind of how it's going to end, but you don't know how it's going to end, and we're not going to push Ukraine to the table, and we're going to just yell at Russia a lot. What exactly is the end goal here? According to the Washington Post, Russia's missile strikes on Ukrainian cities Monday, which President Vladimir Putin said targeted energy, military command, and communications facilities, also hit downtown streets, a playground, and residential areas, bearing a grim resemblance to Russia's brutally indiscriminate military style in Syria, where the Kremlin's new top commander of the war on Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin, rose to prominence. So they've now basically appointed as the head of the Ukrainian military effort, a guy who leveled half of Syria. It's unclear whether Monday's barrage marked a shift in tactics that will characterize the war for months to come. But Surovikin, whose appointment was announced by Russia's defense ministry on Saturday, is most assuredly tasked with shifting results on the battlefield, where Russian forces have suffered a string of setbacks, including a near-total rout in the northeastern Kharkiv region and territorial losses throughout regions Putin decreed annexed in violation of international law. Surovikin, 56, earned the name General Armageddon in Syria. So we're now doing, I guess, like moral combat characters who are taking over armies, is the first overarching commander of the onslaught in Ukraine to be designated publicly by the Russian government. That announcement coincided with the explosion on the Crimean Bridge, a monument to Moscow's 2014 land grab of the Crimean Peninsula and a pet project for Putin that has served as a vital conduit from Russia to the battlefield for troops, weapons, equipment, and other supplies. Such merciless bombing represents a style of warfare similar to that for which Russian generals became infamous during the 2015 incursion into Syria when Moscow sent thousands of troops to prop up the government of Bashar al-Assad. The aerial bombardments left Syrians reeling and caused widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure. Some Ukrainians are now fearful that they will suffer the same fate. Putin awarded Surovikin the Hero of the Russian Federation Medal, the country's highest honor. According to Kirill Mikhailov, a researcher with the conflict intelligence team, quote, he's being called the butcher of Syria, but every general that took that post was a butcher of Syria. It's a job you take because killing people and making their life miserable is what the Russian Air Force can do best. So obviously this is a scary point that we have reached in this war. No off-ramp in sight. Alrighty, we've reached the end of today's show. However, we still have to talk about the midterm elections and the attempt by Democrats to turn this into a referendum on our democracy itself, plus the latest in the Ukraine war. If you're not a member, you need to join over at dailywireplus.com. Click the link in the description and join us right now.